We are now in the lesson 2 of our module 3, which is the classical period, medieval period, Renaissance period. So, what are these periods of art? First one is the Roman and global civilizations. Art has been an integral part of European history from the time the ancient civilization like Greeks and Romans all the way to the modern times. Art has been used to communicate ideologies and belief systems prevalent within their context. So Greek and Roman civilizations were also known as the classical world because both cultures aimed to embody the greatest possible standard of quality in all aspects of their society. So, when it comes to both art and architecture, both civilizations intended to promote possibility of having an objective and widely accepted standards of beauty. So the influence and impact of both classical worlds are far reaching. I remember that most art movements have taken inspiration from the certain artistic elements from the two civilizations, which is the Greek and the Roman civilization. There are different art movements that actually emerge within the different time periods in Europe. Each movement has a distinctive characteristics to them, highlighting the different trends and changes as they transitioned um, from one period to the next period. Classical art. Classical art refers to the ancient art and architecture in Greece and Rome. It is also a term for a long period of cultural history centered on the Mediterranean Sea, comprising the interlocking civilizations of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Collectively known as the Greco-Roman world, it is the period in which Greek and Roman society flourished and wielded great influence throughout Europe. So the artists at this time attained a manner of representation that conveys a vitality of life as well as a sense of permanence, clarity, and harmony. So classical art refers to the art produced in ancient Greece and Rome from the 15th century to the 4th century. Now, both cultures had a profound impact on the development of Western art and their artistic styles and techniques and continue to influence artists up until this day. So in ancient Greece, the classical period was marked by a focus on idealized forms and striving for perfection in art. The human figure was the primary subject, and sculpture sought to, capture the beauty and harmony of the human form. Also, famous works from this period includes the Parthenon sculptures, the State of Zeus, the Olympia, and the Venus of de Milo. So, Roman art naman, on the other hand, was heavily influenced by Greek art. But the Romans added their own unique contributions, such as portraiture and realistic depictions of life. And Roman art was also a political propaganda, with monuments and sculptures celebrating the power and accomplishments of the ruling class. No, and during this time, famous works from this Roman period, includes Colosseum, the Pantheon, and the Ark of Constantine. Now, overall, classical art from ancient Greece and Rome is characterized by a focus on idealized forms, an emphasis on the human figure, and a commitment to achieving perfection in art. So these values continue to inspire and influence artists up until today. Focusing on Greek art, ancient Greeks became interested in a naturalism that is portraying the human form in a realistic and anatomically correct manner. No, so Greek sculptors developed mathematical systems for showing the human body in correct proportions, and sculptures prided themselves on showing how the muscles of the body appeared under the skin when the body was positioned asymmetrical with weight shifted to one hip or the other. So Greek art now refers to the art produced in ancient Greece from the 18th century to the 4th century. Greek art is known for its emphasis on idealized forms, harmony, and balance. It was also heavily influenced by Greek mythology, religion, and philosophy. So Greek art is divided into several periods. You have the geometric period, the archaic period, we have the Hellenistic period. Now, so each period under Greek art has its own distinctive styles and characteristics. So Greek art is known for its emphasis on idealized forms, harmony, and balance, and its influence that can still be seen in art and architecture today. Greek architecture. So we have here three distinct Greek architectural orders. We have the Doric, we have the Ionic, and we have the Corinthian. No, so as you can observe here, we have the Doric, or what we call the Parthenon. Parthenon or the Doric order is the earliest and simplest form of the Greek architectural orders. No, so the Parthenon's columns give an impression of graceful solidity and power. As you can observe there in the example, Doric order doesn't have too much design or too much or extravagant decorations. Then we have the Ionic columns or the Propylia. No, Propylia are taller and more slender than the Doric columns and are topped by capitals that resembles a scroll. As you can observe there, at the upper part of the Ionic, we have the scroll that could definitely be a distinctive quality of an Ionic order. Then we have the Corinthian. Corinthian columns, no, during the classical period. The Corinthian columns or the Corinthian orders are the most elaborated of the three, or the most elaborate of the three Greek architectural orders. And this Corinthian order was used mainly for interior columns. Then we have the Roman art. Now, so about 2000 BC, the Romans conquered the Greeks. During their conquered of Greece, the Romans looted the towns and captured sculptures and brought them to Rome as slaves. Greek artists relied upon the design and repair monumental buildings. The Romans greatly admired the art and architecture of Greece as well as many of their ideas. However, the Romans often used marble to create copies of sculptures that the Greeks had originally made in bronze. Both the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans were humanists with enormous respect for human beings and what they could accomplish with their minds and bodies. This frame of mind was reborn in the Renaissance period. So remember that Roman art was heavily influenced by Greek art. No, but the Romans added their own unique contributions, such as portraiture and realistic depictions of daily life. Roman also use this art as propaganda. As what I've said earlier, they are using this art to celebrate the power and the accomplishments of ruling class. No, so Romans or Roman art refers to the art produced in ancient Rome from the 6th century to the 4th century and was heavily influenced by Greek art. But the Romans, again, now they are adding their distinctive characteristics in their art. And then Roman art is divided into different periods. Now we have the Republican period. We also have the early Empire period, the High Empire period, and these period, just like in Roman art, has its own distinctive style and characteristics. Then we have here the differences between the Greek art and the Roman art. We have the idealistic differences, the sculpture and the architecture. So the Greeks often represented the mythological god in their art in effort to express the ideal form of beauty, physical strength, and power. On the other hand, Roman art had a more practical function. Artwork was primarily used for ornamental and decoration. Sought to capture the perfect physical form of their objects in artwork is one of the idealistic differences of the Greek art, while Romans wanted to produce realistic and natural forms. No Greek art believed that art was an expression of perfection and wanted to produce an ideal form. Roman art, on the other hand, portrayed human emotions instead of an ideal face and wanted to use an individual's natural physical appearance and not ideal. No, Greek art was used to explore nature and philosophy. Roman art was sometimes used as political propaganda. For the sculpture, Greek sculpture tended to focus on athleticism and mythology. Their statues represent their objects in an idealized fashion, making them quite unrealistic though beautiful. The Romans, on the other hand, preferred to sculpt historical events and real people. They are famous for their detailed busts. If a Roman statue is idealized, it is probably a statue of one of the many Roman emperors who were considered to be divinities. No, then for the architecture, marble and stones were the predominant building materials in the Greeks, and for the Romans, they used concrete in constructing the buildings. Okay, so on and so forth. Then we have the medieval period, also known as the Middle Ages. The medieval era is a period in European history that took place between 350 AD to 1450 AD. Medieval art is an account of the history of integration and technique between the elements of classical, early Christian, and barbarian that were produced in different media and styles. Art historians have difficulty classifying medieval art into major periods and styles. The generally accepted scheme in this era are classified into early Christian, Byzantine, Romanesque, and Gothic. Each of these styles was expressed distinctly in different countries and covers a vast scope of time and space. Now, so medieval art refers to art produced in Europe during the Middle Ages, from the 5th to the 15th century. Medieval art was heavily influenced by the Christian Church, and much of it was created for religious purposes. Now, so medieval art is, typically divided into several periods, including again, no, may ara kita, early Christian period, we have Byzantine, and we have the Romanist period and the Gothic period. No, remember that each of this style has its own distinctive styles and characteristics. No, so during the early Christian period, from the 14th to the 6th century, Christian art was heavily influenced by Roman and Greek art. No, early Christian art often depicted biblical images, biblical scenes, and religious figures, and was used to promote the spread of Christianity. Now we have here the different periods of the medieval art: the Byzantine, the Romanesque, and the Gothic. The Byzantine period from the 6th century to the 15th century was characterized by the use of gold in bright colors, as well as intricate patterns and design. Now, Byzantine art was heavily influenced by Eastern Christianity and often depicted religious figures in formal and stylized poses. Romanesque period naman started from the 11th and 13th century. It was marked by the use of rounded arcs, no thick walls, and decorative motifs. Romanesque art often depicted biblical scenes and religious figures and was used to promote the power and authority of the church. Well, here the Gothic, the last one, no, started from the 12th century to the 15th century, and Gothic art was characterized by the use of pointed arcs, ribbed vaults, and buttresses, which allowed for the creation of taller and more elaborate buildings. Now, Gothic art often depicted biblical scenes also and religious figures, but also included secular subjects such as chivalry and courtly love. No, so as a whole, medieval art was heavily influenced by the Christian church. No, and much of it was created for religious purposes. Remember that medieval art is known for its elaborate decorations, intricate patterns, and stylized depictions of religious figures. Then we have the medieval architecture. Medieval architecture is symbolic in nature with little regard for the functional design of other eras. It also has a great variety of buildings like synagogues, halls, and barns that testify to the diverse communities and interests in the Western Europe during the Middle Ages. The most extraordinary buildings during this period were the churches. Toward the end of the 11th century, a style of church building Romanesque was prevalent, beginning in the mid 12th century and becoming more and more popular in the next few centuries was the Gothic style. Also, medieval architecture refers to the architecture of Europe during the Middle Ages from the 5th century to the 15th century. Now, remember that medieval architecture is always characterized with its use of um, different style, including Romanesque and Gothic style, and it's focused on the construction of different churches, different cathedrals, different castles, and other religious and secular buildings. No, so religious buildings such as what you see here in the picture were a major focus of medieval architecture. These buildings were often constructed using the latest techniques and materials, and were designed to be awe-inspiring and to inspire a sense of devotion among worshippers. No, so this medieval architecture is known for its various styles. Remember that its focus is always on religious and secular buildings and its emphasis on the functionality of the different areas of the architecture and different function of the architecture and the symbol that is giving through the use of these architectural styles. Now, many examples of medieval architecture can still be seen in Europe today, including this one, the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, the Tower of London, and the Colosseum in Rome. No, so the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris is a splendid example of Gothic architecture. The facade of the cathedral was built in 1190 to 1240, and it's characterized by, as what you can see there in the picture, two imposing towers. Now, the entrance doors are set into um, pointed arcs finely decorated, the sculpture depicting the Last Judgment, Saint Anne, and the coronation of the buildings. Above the doors is a row of statues of different angels and saints. No, these angels and saints are surmounted by windows and a colonnade. Then we have here the types of arts produced in the medieval period. We have the ceramic, heraldry, illuminated manuscripts, ivory carving, mosaic sculpture, stained glass, tapestry, fresco wall, panel painting. So ceramic art, no, early medieval ceramic arts were hand shaped rather than wheel turned, producing cooking pots and jars, jugs and pitchers and crucibles. Heraldry, on the other hand, is the practice of designing and recording coats of arms and badges. The origins of the heraldry stretch back since the ancient times. You know, warriors often decorated their shields with patterns and mythological motifs. No, illuminated manuscripts naman were religious texts embellished with rich colors which often feature the use of gold and silver. Ivory carving is the carving, of course, of the ivory by using sharp cutting tools, either mechanically or manually. No, this ivory has been used by people since the earliest times in our regions of the world because it depicts no beauty, it depicts fashion. Then mosaic is very common up until today, especially in our country. It is the art of creating images with small pieces of colored glass, stone, or other material. Then we have the sculpture, of course. Gothic sculpture evolved from the early stiff and elongated style of statues used in Romanesque art. Stained glass naman, on the other hand, it's a small pieces of glass arranged to form patterns or pictures, which are held together by strips of lead and supported by rigid frame. Tapestry is a form of textile art traditionally woven on vertical loom on which color designs and scenes usually hang on walls for decoration. Then we have the fresco wall. Fresco wall is a painting type which is executed in plaster and on walls and ceilings. Frescoes are paintings made directly into the wall or ceiling. Now, then we have the panel painting. It is a painting on a panel made of a single or several pieces of wood joined together. Now, panel painting was the normal form of support for painting until canvas became popular in the 16th century. Then we have the Renaissance. Renaissance is a series of literary and cultural movement begun in Italy and eventually expanded into Germany, France, England, and other parts of Europe. Now, Renaissance means rebirth or revival, and a time of new discoveries in the field of fine arts, music, literature, philosophy, science, and technology, architecture, religion, and spirituality. So, Renaissance was a cultural and intellectual movement that began in Italy in 14th century and spread throughout Europe during the 15th and 16th centuries. Now, the Renaissance was actually characterized by a renewed interest in classical art, literature, and learning, as well as giving greater emphasis in on humanism and individualism. Then Renaissance art was marked by a focus on realism, perspective, and proportion. Artists during this time sought to capture what the natural world is all about, using different techniques such as shading, no, to create the illusion of depth and dimension. Then it was also characterized by a greater emphasis on the individual, with many artists creating portraits and self portraits during this time. So, Renaissance architecture, on the other hand, was actually marked by a return to classical forms and styles, such as the use of columns, domes, and arches. It also places a great emphasis on symmetry, proportion, and harmony in the design during this period. So the Renaissance had a profound impact on European culture and society, influencing everything from art and literature to politics and religion. So the Renaissance marked the beginning of the modern era, and its influence can still be seen today in many aspects in the Western culture. Now, some of the famous examples of Renaissance art and architecture includes the work of Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and of course the St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Then we have here the early Renaissance from 1400s to 1475 AD. So the early Renaissance period began in Florence towards the end of the 14th century. During this period, a revolution in philosophy, science, and mathematics dramatically changed composition and representation in the arts, where the subject matter remained primarily Christians. A variety of additional symbols and themes were introduced during this time. So early Renaissance art um, refers to the art produced in Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries at the beginning of the Renaissance period. Now, so early Renaissance art is marked by, again, a renewed interest in classical art and culture, as well as a focus on realism, perspective, and humanism. Now, so one of the most important developments in early Renaissance art was the use of linear perspective. No, artists such as Filippo Brunelleschi, Leon Battista Alberti, they developed these new techniques for creating illusion of depth and space in their paintings, and they are using mathematical principles to create realistic representations of the natural world. And remember that early Renaissance art was also marked by greater emphasis on the creation of self-portraits. No, so early Renaissance art was actually influenced by classical art of ancient Greece and Rome. No, and many artists look to the past for inspiration. No, so the works of different artists were studied and emulated, and classical motifs such as the human figure and architectural elements were incorporated into the early Renaissance art. Then we have the High Renaissance. Now, High Renaissance produces the most and the best art that epitomizes the movement. It includes the big names like Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. Many artists during these times were excelled in many different things. The origin of the phrase Renaissance man. Artists such as Michelangelo, Brunelleschi reached their peak during this era. So the High Renaissance is a period of artistic and cultural achievement that is generally considered to have taken place in the Italy during 15th and 16th centuries. It was marked by a, again, um, renewed interest in classical art and culture, as well as a focus again on individualism and realism and the exploration of human emotions and experiences. Now, some of the most famous artists, again, we have the Leonardo da Vinci, we have Michelangelo and Raphael. These artists, produced some of the most iconic works of art in history. That includes Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Michelangelo's David and the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and the Raphael's School of Athens. So the High Renaissance was marked by several key developments in art and culture. One of the most important was the development of sfumato. Sfumato is a technique, for blending colors and creating soft, smoky edges that was pioneered by Leonardo da Vinci. Now, so these sfumato technique allowed artists to create more realistic and naturalistic representations of the natural world, and it is still used in painting today. Then the last one is the late Renaissance. So late Renaissance, while technically masterful mannerist compositors were full of clashing colors, disquieting figures with abnormally elongated limbs, often torturous-looking emotion, and bizarre themes that combine classicism, Christianity, and mythology is often depicted in the late Renaissance period. So late Renaissance is also known as mannerism, refers to period of artistic and cultural development that occurred in Europe during the 16th century. Following the High Renaissance, it was marked by a shift away from the classical forms and idealized beauty of the High Renaissance and towards a more complex, abstract, and stylized aesthetic. No? So Mannerist art was marked by a rejection of the naturalism and realism of the High Renaissance, and a greater emphasis on the artist's subjective vision and imagination. No? So one of the most significant developments of the late Renaissance is the use of chiaroscuro. No, it's again creating the illusion of depth and dimension through the use of light and shade.